All right, welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I'm Laura Backus, and publisher of Children's Book Insider, the Children's Writing Monthly, and I'm really excited for our panel tonight of teen readers. They're going to tell us a lot about what they like and don't like in the books they're reading, so it's going to be a great conversation. And Sally Lowenstein is here with us too. She's an author illustrator. So let's get started. For those of you who are new to us and you want to get on our mailing list to find out about all the stuff we're doing, you can go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet and fill that out. You'll get on our mailing list. You'll find out who our guests are in upcoming socials, as well as other fun stuff we're doing. And you'll get a free ebook, The Ultimate Guide Children's Writing Cheat Sheet, which compiles 30 years of info about getting started writing for kids. This is our 30th year in business. So that is yours for free for getting on our list. And if you're interested in subscribing to our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, it comes out once a month. We have a special price, $5 a month for our socialites. And you can see the link, writeforkids.org/CBI. And it's a newsletter that will be delivered to your inbox every month. It's about 20 pages, has market information, articles about writing, interviews with authors, editors, and agents. We also have a special spotlight interview once a month where an editor or agent gives us a special above the slush pile code that you can use to submit and jump over the slush pile. Awesome. And you get access to our CBI Clubhouse online membership site that has 30 years worth of stuff, all for $5 a month. So now we have Celebrate, where we get to celebrate your successes. So I have 3 great ones this week. Tanya Pembers writes that after reading the article in Children's Book Insider about the Old Schoolhouse magazine, I crafted a query, they accepted it, and I have an assignment for their spring 2022 edition. Thanks, CBI. Awesome, Tanya. That is great, and I'm so happy you were able to take one of those great marketing tips from CBI and turn it into a sale. So congratulations on that. Paula Henson's debut nonfiction picture book, Who Needs a Forest Fire, is now available through online retailers. The book describes why California forests have become mismanaged, frequently fire-ravaged ecosystems, starting with how the arrival of miners and settlers during the gold rush upended the natural balance of the forest that Native Americans had maintained. So this is a really important topic here, and she distills it for picture book readers. And you can see more about that book and her teacher's guide at her website, terrabellabooks.com. So congratulations, Paula. That looks awesome. And Carol Devine's debut children's book, God's Promise of Faith, will be released on April 30th from Austin Macaulay Publishers. Awesome. That is really, really great. So congratulations to everybody. I want to hear your good news. Please email us at writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line. And we'll feature you on a future Kidlit Distancing Social, and send me as much info as you can. If you have a picture of the cover, or whatever, as much detail as you can send me about your good news, I would love it. And it does not have to be a publication. No celebration is too small for us to help you celebrate. I would like to tell you about something great that we are doing. This Thursday, we are relaunching our magazine writing blueprint, which is awesome, with Carrie Flanagan. And there is a free webinar where you are going to learn the types of magazine articles you can write, how to pick the best ones for you, her time-tested system for generating multiple article ideas, and how to take your idea, spin it off into multiple versions, and sell it to multiple publications. So that's all free in this webinar. And you'll also get access as soon as you sign up to another webinar called Carrie's Magazine Writing 101 Workshop. During the Thursday webinar, there'll be a live Q&A session. You're going to get a couple great PDFs and a chance to get the full magazine writing blueprint at a big discount. So if you're interested in that, and you haven't already been getting notifications about this, if you have and you've already signed up, you're on the list, don't worry about it. But if this is news to you and you would really love to join us live on Thursday, you can go to bit.ly/mag-start to sign up. And if you can't make it live, it will be recorded. You will get the replay, but you have to sign up in order to get the replay. So it's going to be awesome. Magazine writing, a lot of people have kind of, John says the link is covered in the slide. Sorry about that. I don't know what to do about that. I will say it again, and this link will be under the replay when you get it. It's okay now. Good. What was I going to say? A lot of you have kind of, during the pandemic, maybe gotten a little stalled in your writing, or, you're kind of gearing back up. Things are starting to get back to normal for you. Maybe your kids are going back to school and you got some time now. And the idea of actually sitting down and working on your novel is pretty intimidating if you've been a little rusty. Writing for magazines is a great way to kind of get your writing muscles back. They're shorter, they're less intimidating. You can do one bit of research and spin it into a lot of different articles. It will get you back into researching the markets. Also, it can get you writing all sorts of stuff if you need a break from a novel that you've been working on. So, hope to see you at this webinar. Okay, links of interest. This is a cool one that I have today. So a lot of you have asked me, or I get questions a lot about hybrid publishing. Those of you who are interested in self-publishing, and you see things about hybrid publishing and you wonder what it is, if it's something you should try. So hybrid publishing is kind of a combination of traditional and self-publishing. It resembles self-publishing because the author carries the financial risk. So the author pays for the publication of the book. So in that way, it's like self-publishing. It's a little like traditional publishing in that you have an organization with professionals who will edit your book, design your book, design the cover, get the book printed, do all of those things that you might not want to handle yourself. But you own the book, and then you sell it and you keep the profits. So you're paying them a flat fee to do these things for you. So it's kind of like hiring a contractor to work on your house. You own the house when it's done, but they did some work for you. So anyway, this article is really great. It just lays everything out, and it really makes it clear what this is and the pros and cons and some things to look for if you're looking into these publishers. So everything you've always wanted to know, Hybrid Publishing by Barbara Lynn Probst on Jane Friedman's blog. I created a bit.ly link that takes you directly to this post, bit.ly/about hybrid publishing. So check that out. Okay, now I would like to welcome one of my guests, Sally Lowenstein. So Sally, you can go ahead and come on with me. Sally Lowenstein is an award-winning author, illustrator of children's and young adult books, and a professional fine artist who exhibits her paintings and sculptures in galleries and museums across the country. For 26 years, she's been the publisher of the small press Stone Lion Books. And she's Lionstone Books. I always want to say Stone Lion, and I have Lionstone written right in front of me. Lionstone Books. Sorry about that.
All right.
And She's been mentoring young writers for over 25 years, which she's going to talk to us about in just a minute. She also 2 years ago started a free newsletter, which is awesome, about children's books called Old Books, Young Readers, Backlist and Forgotten Books for Babies Through Teens. And to subscribe to this free newsletter, there's an email right there, oldbooksyoungreaders@gmail.com. You can send her an email and subscribe. It's really, really great. So, Sally, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for
And
having us.
yeah, and so I wanted to start with you because I wanted you to tell us a little bit about these young adults that you are mentoring in their writing and kind of how this whole topic came about. This started as an article for your newsletter. And while you are telling us that, I'm going to show another slide which has some books on it that some of my other guests will be talking about in a few minutes. So I wanted to give you all a little heads up on that. But Sally, tell us about how this group came together.
So when I first started publishing 25 years ago, a bookstore owner, a bookstore manager actually, and I sat down and we were brainstorming about how to get kids really interested in both reading and writing. And so she suggested maybe I'd like to do a workshop in her bookstore. And that was actually about 27 years ago now. We started out thinking it would be a teenage group, and the first group were little kids, and they stayed 10 years. They started when they were 8 and 9, and they stayed till they went off to college.
Wow.
And in the interim, we started a second one. So because as they got older, they all stayed together. And then we started a second group for the younger kids. And for a long time, I did that. As children's bookstores have sort of disappeared in our area, we live outside of Washington, D.C. And I started in Arlington, Virginia, actually, which is across the river from where I live. It sort of shifted to being mainly, we started more like when we were 10 or 11, and the kids are still staying until they're like 18. Most of the kids stay between 3 and 8 or 9 years. It's a long time. And it's because the group is designed to mentor them, but also to give them freedom to choose what they want to write. And in the process, we discuss a lot of literature. About probably around 2008, which is now 13 years ago, kids started asking me. I also taught at our local community college, and I did intensive creative workshops for kids during the summer. And all of these kids, hundreds of kids were saying to me, can you give us a list of good books to read? We're having trouble wading through the number of books there are. And so that came together, and the longer we've gone on, even more recently, I think the kids are even more frustrated because of the number of books that are being published in all different forms. So I realized that they had an opportunity with Old Books, Young Readers to actually have a chance to express how they felt about what they'd like to see being written for them. So we decided that we would do this newsletter edition, and we started working on it. And it took us quite a while because they were so busy writing, trying to get them to focus on writing an article was a really, together as a group, was a really different process. And that was an experience for them, I think, I hope. At that time, we had combined our two groups. I had one in Arlington and one in Montgomery County, Maryland. Probably none of that may not mean a lot to people who aren't from our area, but one was on one side of the river, and one was on the other side of the river. And because of COVID, we ended up being on a Zoom group for this last year, which was very different experience than being a regular group. And these are great kids. A lot of them want to go on to be writers. A lot of them are fabulous writers. And I've been hearing recently, probably because of COVID, from a whole bunch of kids who've been in the groups in the past who are now getting published or writing as a journalist. it's really pretty astounding and really super that they are able to do that. And
Right.
they're in their 20s mainly. And
That's great. That is
yeah,
great.
it is.
Great. Well, let me stop sharing my screen and let's have all of our teen panelists come on so we can meet you all and then we'll start talking about books. And feel free to unmute yourselves if you want. So I would like, just wave when when I introduce you. So we've got Noah, who's in 12th grade, Jacqueline, who's in 8th grade, Sophia in 10th grade, Josie in 12th grade, Jeremy in 12th grade, and Sean in 11th grade. So thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. I know you're all really busy with school and a lot of you are doing college applications right now. So I appreciate you very much, you taking the time out for us here tonight. And I know we've got a lot of very appreciative viewers right now. So I want to start. I asked ahead of time, I asked each of you to kind of think of one or two books that you really love that you could tell us about tonight and tell us why you love them. Now, bear in mind, I'm talking to the people who are listening here. These might not all be YA books. Some of these might be books for adults, but I think that's very telling in that when you tell us what you love about these books, writers can translate some of those qualities into the young adult books that they're writing. So Noah, let's start with you. What books are your favorites?
Well, there are a lot of books to choose from. I've been reading for a very long time, but the books I brought in to talk about today are Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl and Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. Uh, I They're very different books. One of them's nonfiction, one of them's very fiction. But I like them both quite a bit. Kon-Tiki is the real story of a man who had a theory about where the people of Polynesia originated globally. He thought they came from South America, but people at the time did not think that the rafts that they had at the time were strong enough. The technology of the indigenous people was advanced enough to make such a long distance. So he set out. He made a raft with some of his friends that would have been the kind of raft that they would have been able to construct back then, and made the trip. And I don't know, it's a very interesting like real life adventure story. You know, the golden age of exploration is something that has like a lot of romanticism to it. You know, it's interesting to
Mm-hmm.
hear about these guys exploring the world, but most of those guys, if you look into nonfiction about them, they were just terrible, terrible people. But you know, this is a mission that you can kind of get behind. It's not a, you know, for the British
Mm-hmm.
Empire or whatever. It's a
Right.
scientific exploration to prove
Let me
that.
ask you a quick question about that before you move on. So that book I think was written in like 1948, somewhere around there. So how did you find the writing? Do you feel that it's pretty timeless, that it holds up, or does it take a little adjustment to kind of get into the flow of it as a reader?
No, I did not I I don't think I had any trouble with it. It's been a while since I've read it, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, it was uh I very much it was pretty easy to get into. It's you know,
Great.
Thor Heyerdahl is a scientist and explorer, I guess, more than he is a writer. So the you know, the writing's pretty plain except for
Mm-hmm.
some specific parts. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not a trick to get into at all. No.
Okay, great.
The other one I brought in was Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. It's one of the Discworld books, and really those as a whole is you know, that's a very long series, but I wanted to bring in one from them to represent them, and I like Hogfather a lot. Discworld is a series by Terry Pratchett. It's a series of like satirical comedic fantasy books all set on a, you know, kind of farcical parody of both a lot of fantasy worlds but also of our world. It's the kind of series. It's very long, and I think it's really a masterwork of world building, because basically it doesn't follow like one set of characters.
Mhm.
Basically, every position in that world is examined from the point the main character of one of those books. You know, every facet of that world is explored in one of those novels. But even the world building is not even what most people talk about when they talk about the book, because the humor and the satire and social commentary is so standout. That's usually what people talk about when
Hmm.
they talk about that series. I like Hogfather in particular. It's one of my favorite books that follows the character of Death, who is the Grim Reaper of Discworld, and it focuses on like humanity's need to kind of tell lies about things, like not like falsehoods, but come up with concepts that do not necessarily exist in the real world. And through that, they take the lens of, you know, holiday creatures like Santa Claus, or Hogfather as he's called on Discworld. But it kind of expands that to talk about broader concepts like justice and morality, and I think that's really neat, as well as just being uh, one of the funniest fantasy series ever read. And you know, it's books are harder to get a laugh out loud moment, I think, than other mediums, because you can't get like comedy so much about timing, and you can't really control timing as much in the written word. But
Mhm.
those books consistently make me laugh out loud, which I think is a great accomplishment for a book.
Well, great. Thank you so much. That's great. And I'm going to circle back to a lot of stuff that you talked about there, but I want to hear from everyone else first. So thank you, Noah. So Jacqueline, let me hear from you next. What books did you want to share with us? Book or books?
I really love the book Princess Academy by Shannon Hale
Hmm.
um, for a couple of different reasons. I I think I read it like a year ago for the first time, and I love that it was like not your very typical like ooh like the princess and the prince and like
Hmm.
charm school and that like almost I don't know like cliche I want to say. And I thought it was just very like it was just different, which was I find is so hard to come by a lot now with like YA novels and um, books for like this age group.
Hmm.
Um, so I really love that. I don't even know if it's a YA novel or not, but
It
and
won a Newbery honor, so I believe. And I think that's for readers up to about age 14, the Newbery. So it's probably like the young end of YA or the old end of middle grade. It's probably one of those that kind of is right in between there.
um and sorry, should I talk about like what it's about? And okay.
Yes, I would like to hear that. You said how it's different from your typical princess sort of cliche book. So how is it different?
So it's there's this like kingdom and kind of like almost separated from this kingdom is this mountain called Mount Eskel. And there's this village of people who are like very close to each other and their lives are centered around this quarry. And it's just this so it's so communal and basically there's a prince who needs like a princess or a bride and so they hold there's I'm sorry there's like the priests will like decide which district will like the princess will come from and then they hold an academy to prepare them to be a princess. So for like the first time in forever Mount Eskel is chosen to like have this academy. So all these mountain girls who are not proper at all go to this like academy to learn how to be a princess. And the main character kind of through this academy discovers like because at first you like, ooh, princess, like riches, balls, yummy food. But she realizes later that like it's not maybe what she belongs or what she's looking for in life, which I think is so different from like your very typical like ooh, like competing to be a princess or
Right, right.
sort of fighting for it. So yeah.
Great. So it kind of modernized the whole idea of what it is to be a princess in a lot of
Kind
ways.
of.
Sounds like,
Yes.
yeah.
And I think it sounds also as if it has a sort of bigger theme than just becoming a princess, to talk about identity and how you find your identity and what that means to you, which I think is really important for as a message for kids.
I also
agree.
thought one more thing, the style of writing and the language was so wonderful, which I think is hard to come by nowadays, like especially in books for teenagers or tweens. So yeah.
Yeah, well, Shannon Hale, the author, is a very good writer. She's written a lot of books, and I think she's a great model for writers who want to write for that sort of audience that she reaches. So thank you for bringing that one to our attention. All right, Sophia, let's hear from you. What do you like? What books do you like?
Well, I like a lot of books, but today I brought 2 books, The Book Thief, and I have them here so I can.
Great.
The Book Thief, and which is a historical fiction, and The Ghost Map, which is nonfiction. And I'll talk about The Ghost Map first because I've read that recently.
Can you hold that cover up again, the ghost map? Because this is one that I hadn't been aware of, and I read the description and I went and ordered it from my library because it sounds really awesome. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. So yes, I want to hear about that one for sure.
So I think it's for adults. This book, not necessarily a YA, but I feel like for nonfiction, they often don't label books that way. You just have to see, and most of them are written for adults anyway, or really little children, which I think is something that was brought up in the article. But I read it for a class, and I wasn't expecting to like it because I don't usually really like nonfiction, but this one, I love this one. It's about the cholera outbreak in London, which happened. I don't actually remember exactly when, in the like mid 1800s, I think. But I thought it was so interesting the way Stephen Johnson wrote it, because often nonfiction books can be kind of boring, at least in my opinion, especially historical ones. They just talk about facts, and there's not really kind of like a story, which is, I mean, it's understandable because it's not a story, but because it's history, kind of is a story. So the way this book is written, it's almost told as a fiction. Not really, but it kind of has that feel. And I mean, it still goes into details and really interesting facts, and there's a lot of details in there, which I also really like. It goes down to very small, tiny things. But
Didn't and I may be wrong here, but I seem to recall from reading the description that it talks about that the cities are now like this influenced how cities are designed because of the way that the epidemic spread through the city. Yeah, and that's very interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting. The way he talked about how so many of these organizations were made to basically completely remodel London, and then all the cities were modeled like that to have a sewage system and just generally cleaner. People realize that it's not okay to live like this in such dirty conditions because people get sick easily.
Right.
So yeah, it did influence cities a lot, and he talks about it at the end of the book. but I wanted to talk about characters because I think characters are super important. And even though this is a nonfiction book, Steven Johnson kind of wrote it with these historical figures like the Dr. Jon Snow. And we followed Jon Snow most of the time as if he was the main character. And when Jon Snow died, I was like, oh no, I don't want him to die. I like Jon Snow, as if it was a fictional character. And, you know, he builds up character and personalities for these historical people. And it's super interesting. He also put photographs of the doctors and that he brings up, which I thought was also very cool.
Great. Awesome. And then you brought The Book Thief, which is one of my favorite books.
Yeah, here it is.
Talk about characters.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
The main thing about this, I guess, is structure. And which is why I wanted to bring this particular one, because first of all, I mean, it's told by Death, which I think is so cool and interesting. And it's not even said that it's told by Death. We kind of figure it out on our own. The way he's saying, like what he's saying and stuff about the world and the people. And you just kind of at some point know that it's Death. And the way Death talks about our world is so interesting. I think at some point he mentions food and how it compares like the surroundings of our world to food and colors and everything, and it's so interesting. Just the structure of this book is different, very unusual, original, I guess, is what I'm saying. I can show you. I found a page where it says 2 questions, and then it lists the questions, and throughout the book there are several parts like that where he states something in that way, which I think is so interesting. I don't know. I feel like not a lot of people do that.
So it's an interesting narrative structure and narrative voice that the author's using. Yeah.
The narrative is very
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll circle back to a lot of those things. Okay, Josie, let's hear from you.
My books are Breathing Room by Marcia Hales and All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda. And I do have a copy of All the Missing Girls, but my sister's reading it right now because I lent it. So I didn't want to go in there and get it. But I want to talk about Breathing Room first because that was a big book for me. I read it twice, and then my whole family read it after because it's just incredible. Honestly, it's just a beautiful book. It's a beautiful story, and then the writing is amazing. But I think what I really loved about it was that it takes on some heavy topics, and it's a YA novel. So like, it's a great intro to these heavy. It's about a girl in 1940s who's struggling with tuberculosis, and then the people she meets during that time, and also a lot of the issues that are happening in the country at that time woven into the story. And it's a great introduction to that topic for that age. I feel like it's incredible. And another thing I really loved about it was you walked away from that book with like, despite all the tragedies that happen in the book and all the like everything that happens, you walk away from it like feeling like you want to read more, honestly. And I really love that about that one. Another thing I loved about it too was I felt the characters in the novel were teenagers. And even though these were teenagers existing in the 1940s with tuberculosis, I remember reading it and thinking like that I could hear some of the things that they were saying as if my own friends were saying it. And some of the quirks and mannerisms that they had, I had it, and I could see my friends having them too. And I think that really made all those like really emotional points in the novel hit even harder because I could imagine them like, in my own life and with that same age group. So it was really incredible to me.
Right.
Big novel for me.
Great.
And the other one I read was All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda, which is told backwards, which is just incredible to me. It was told like from the end, and then it goes to the beginning, almost in like a reverse chronological order. And I started it, and I was like, why would you start a book at the end and then go to the beginning because you already know things, but you don't, which is the most amazing part of it. Is it also it tempers with unreliability and unreliable narrators, and I just think it was just something so different and so interesting. So
Great, thank you. And by the way, for those of you listening, I have all these books on that slide that I showed. And so when you get the replay, you'll be able to take a look at that and see the books that they're all talking about. Okay, Jeremy, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so this was hard for me to choose two books, but I think
Yeah.
the first first one I chose, this is a classic. I had to choose The Lord of the Rings. It's, so many people have read this book. It's a collection of 3 books, but I think that the story is just the way he makes it is unbelievable. He created a world in such detail that it's almost like the Odyssey mixed with a bunch of other things in a way that YA can sort of understand. And it's so original for its time. And I loved reading it as a kid. It was amazing. He just created such an elaborate mythology and all those incredibles out of it. And then the second book I chose was Agatha Christie. She writes a lot of very popular mysteries. One that I liked was And Then There Were None. It's actually really a horror story, which is really hard to do with writing. It's hard to create a truly terrifying book that keeps your reader up at night and wants to give them nightmares. But that book gave me nightmares, and in a good way. It was pretty horrifying. It basically, you start out with a bunch of characters and they all slowly die, and it's just terrifying. But it's the structure is sort of poetic, and it's super cool. It's such a fun read.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, Sean, last but not least.
So I agree with Jeremy about it being hard to pick just 2 books. I've read so many great books with so many great plots, but the 2 books I decided to bring in today were Steinbeck's The Red Pony and Faulkner's Light in August. So very different in terms of plot. So I didn't really bring them in to talk about the plot, but really I wanted to talk about the writing, like the beautiful imagery that's used and the vocabulary used. Unfortunately, a lot of YA that's published these days doesn't have that same detailed vocabulary, doesn't have the same imagery and symbolism, metaphors that we see in these older classics. And I think that really is a shame because there's so many great plots out there, and I've picked up so many books where I thought, okay, this could be a really interesting story, but the language is just so bland. There's really no interest in reading the story. And it's like a waste of that beautiful premise that could have been something really, really interesting. I think a lot of YA novelists might be afraid to put in this complicated language. They want to make it readable for younger kids, like middle schoolers who might not have that strong vocabulary. But that's one of the ways that we get such a strong vocabulary is from reading. And when books don't use that kind of beautiful language, kids being exposed to it, and so they can't build up the vocabulary necessary to understand. You need all these wonderful classics.
I agree. And, Kate DiCamillo is a writer who's writing younger than YA, but she tends to use much more sophisticated language in her books, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane and Tale of Despereaux and those books. And I agree. A lot of what she writes is for sort of kids age 7 to 10, but very sophisticated language, and they can handle it. They love it. And I agree that is a quality that we don't see as often as we used to in YA and middle grade.
I also think there's a marketing issue with this because the marketers have decided how it's sort of divided up. And I mean, you really have 13 to 18-year-olds in YA, and that's a ridiculous span. The difference between a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old on the average is huge, both in topic and in style. And I think that's another issue, and one of the reasons why the language has been, I don't like to use the word dumbed down, but in a sense dumbed down so that it will reach across that border, but it leaves the older out.
Right.
Out, really. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think we need a YA designation that's maybe 16 and up, you know, or even 15 and up, and then 12 to 15 could be younger. And then if you can read older if you want.
That's right.
But the writers, when you're writing, you kind of have a narrower audience that you're writing for, vocabulary wise and style wise. I agree.
Plus the number of books that are being published right now, it makes it very hard for the kids to wade through. And that's what they said about also adult nonfiction, is that they have a big problem knowing what to pick because so much of it, and some of it's truly not written for somebody who isn't a scholar. So, you know, and that's totally left out. They totally missed the teen market nonfiction completely.
Well, I was going to, let's do a lightning round here because I do want to save time for some questions. I think, Noah, you're the one who mentioned before we started about nonfiction that you felt there wasn't enough good nonfiction being written for YA. Was that you who said that? One of you did.
Jeremy, right?
Oh, that was
Jeremy said that originally, but you mentioned it with Kontiki.
Oh, well, I mentioned that it was, I don't think I mentioned that it was in contrast to modern nonfiction. I think that's more, I don't read as much nonfiction as Jeremy. I think that's
okay. Well, so let's go back to, you know, real quick. If you can think of one or two things like that just really annoy you when you're reading a book, and if an author does this, you're just like, nope, put the book down.
I think the biggest turnoff for me is like bad pacing. I think if something I feel like is taking up too much time in a story, it turns me off. Or if it's not or if it was kind of rushed through, that can really break my immersion. I think both of those are real bad. That's something I'm really sensitive about in both writing I read and also in my own writing. That's something I do most of my rewrites for. Is you know, is this taking the right amount of time within the frame of the story?
Right. That's a great point. Now, a lot of books for younger kids, chapter books for like that 7 to 10 age, or even middle grade, some are paced so that there's kind of a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, or there's something exciting, some tension, so that the reader has to keep going. They can't put the book down. Do you like that or not like that? In YA, they're not as strict about that particular element of pacing, and it depends on the kind of story, of course. But how do you like your chapter endings to go?
I mean, I always think a dramatic ending is a plus. You know, it does make you want to continue reading, as long as it has like a satisfying payoff. I think that's always good. It's also, especially in younger stories, you know, if you want a kid to start reading, having that constant like wanting the next chapter is a great way to do it. You know, it's not the most sophisticated technique to make people to keep people reading, but it's definitely an effective one.
Okay, great. And one more quick question for you, Noah. You had mentioned, you know, with the books that you were talking about, Terry Pratchett, it sounds like you like stuff that's got a lot of layers to it. You know, you've got the humor there, you've got social commentary, you've got this fantasy world, you know. Do you ever feel that writers of YA, true YA books, don't give their audience enough credit as far as how many layers they can handle in stories, or have you found that to be a problem?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you can analyze anything and take meaning from anything. But I definitely think, you know, I've not read a whole lot of true YA in my life. But I, you know, yeah, I think layers are definitely kind of subjective, where you can find meaning in anything, but I don't really have a great answer for that one.
Okay. Well,
But Noah himself writes in multiple layers.
okay.
Great world builder. So I think it is important to him. Whether he's thought of it.
Sounds
Yeah.
like it. Okay. Jacqueline, what do you have any pet peeves on books that when you're reading that authors do that you hate?
A few. Um, I really don't like forced romance or putting in romance because there is no romance, or it's like it has to be there almost, even though it doesn't really contribute anything to the story. And I think it's just sort of annoying. It's no, not annoying, but it's like it just doesn't contribute to the story, and it makes me lose the flow a little bit, I guess. I'm not really sure how to phrase that. And then I had one other. Oh, when like the whole story is just like very sad and like depressing like the entire time. Like I think that writing sad things is pretty easy, but I think to include different or like vary the emotion, I guess, like in a story makes it more interesting, or it mixes it up,
Right.
which I really like to see because yeah, it just makes it more interesting, I guess.
Okay. Thank you. Sophia, what are your pet peeves?
I think that, well, I agree with Jacqueline about the forced romance that can just ruin characters or the plot. It kind of makes it, I don't know, you're reading a book and it's good, and then some forced romance happens and you're just like, that just no. And then you're sitting there like, oh, I would have done that instead. And instead of reading the book, you're just criticizing it. And that it just kind of throws you off. And I think that to me, characters are really important. And if characters are perfect, I don't really like that, because then there's no growth to happen. Why would you want to read a book about these people who are the same throughout the entire story and nothing changes and they have no flaws? Because real people have flaws, and every person has a flaw, and that's just unrealistic that if they are perfect, there's nothing to read about. If the book is about a person or characters, then yeah, I think that's really important for them to be flawed, almost, I want to say, which is kind of, it sounds harsh, but yeah. And I guess that's
Okay.
it.
So that perfect characters, that is a very good point. A lot of writers, adult writers, worry about having their characters make big mistakes in the stories because they think, oh, then the readers are going to do the same thing as the character, and the characters have to be good examples. Now, can you tell our viewers that you all are smart enough to figure out that what the character's doing is probably not something you should emulate, but it makes for an interesting story? I mean, do you really want to go, oh, yeah, that taking those drugs, that looks like a good idea. I'm going to go do that.
The point is to see the person change from that. But yeah, of course, a lot of people, especially YA, you expect these people to know. I mean, children, I guess, they can look at a character and see, oh, they're doing that, and they might not know what's bad or good, because they're young. But for YA books, yeah, it's, I mean,
Right.
we.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it does, it makes it interesting to see them make mistakes and then to see how are they going to get out of this? What are they going to do to fix this? That's what makes the interesting story. So I completely agree with you. Okay, Josie, how about you?
I feel like personally, my biggest like turn off of a book, and I know this definitely like turned me off of reading for a while, is just originality. I've read so many stories that are just the same story, but kind of like just a little detail tweak or something.
Mhm.
And not even just plot. I feel like also in like methods of storytelling or in like description. There's just there's a lot of the same almost idea being like perpetuated, and like this is the good way to tell a story. Um, and I think I've read some great books like that. I'm not saying that originality is like the only way to go, but I do feel that the books that I've read that have really stuck with me and really made me want to keep reading have all been at least either original for their time or um, original now. So
Mhm. Mhm. Do you like it when authors take a risk and they try something really different, like either a character, like with the book Thief, having death narrate the story? You know, that's a big risk that author took, or a format that's different that you've never seen before. Does that sort of thing catch your eye when you're looking at books?
yes, definitely. And
Mhm.
I've definitely read some books where I've like read the book and I've thought like, oh, I didn't like the plot as much for that, or I didn't like the theme, but I've always like walked away thinking about it if the something was different and something was original. Even if even if it was some like a adventure story, and I'm not a big fan of adventure, but if it was like something original, I've always stuck with it and I've always thought about it after.
Mhm. Mhm. Great, thanks. Okay, Jeremy, how about you?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Josie just said, actually. And I think that originality and unoriginality goes hand in hand with predictability. If you read the first 5 pages of a book and you can tell straight through what the ending is going to be, it's not going to be a good book. And
Yep.
if there's multiple paths that the book can take, then I'm willing to keep reading it. But if it's easily predictable, then it's not going to be original. And,
Mhm.
I like The Lord of the Rings, but there have been many horrible spins off of that series, pretty much, where they basically just tweak a small thing and call it an original book.
Right.
And if you do that, it's entirely predictable and it's not very original. And that's a big pet peeve of mine.
Mhm. Mhm. Great. And publishing is notorious for that because one book or series breaks the mold and creates a whole new genre, and then publishers are like, "Well, we need 10 more of those because people are buying that." And so some of that is the fault of the publishers as well, for sure. For sure. Okay, Sean, sorry to make you last all the time. I'm sorry. I'm just going in the order you're on my screen. So,
I think one thing that definitely turns me off from a book is a lot of YA authors these days try to use too much slang or like text speak. Like they're trying to express that kids are communicating virtually, which a lot of kids do, especially these days. But that doesn't mean it needs to read like an AOL Instant Messenger chat. We don't want to be reading these like, acronyms or abbreviations or all this slang. It really makes it hard to read.
mhm.
And there's other ways to portray that kids are texting than to well, I've seen it different ways in different books. Some books they even go so far as to put like text bubbles in between paragraphs.
Mhm.
That's really
That's terrible.
breaks with the flow of the book.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something authors struggle with, especially sort of newer authors. How much slang to put in, how much, if you're writing a contemporary novel that takes place in the US, you want to have your characters be authentic, and they're going to have smartphones, they're going to be texting their friends, and you know, all that sort of thing. But how much of that do you put in without it getting annoying, like you said? And I think that when you see it on the page, it's always so much more intrusive than if you were to just glance at your phone in real life. You know what I mean? So a little goes a long way, I think is what you're saying.
I think one of the problems, not just in texting, but in general, is that authors feel the need to put explicitly, like in quotes, what people are saying in a conversation rather than using descriptive language to describe, what they're telling each other. And that can
Mhm.
make writing text conversations a lot easier if you're just communicating that they're talking about their plans for later rather than saying
Right.
TYL, see you at 12.
So, yes, so have the character sort of paraphrase what's happening in the conversation or paraphrase it in the narrative, not just have the exact words
To be
from the
explicit.
texts. That
Laura,
is a good point. Mhm.
one other thing along that line is, and I've seen this done, and I feel it's a terrible mistake, is when you have a character think in slang, not
Mhm.
speak it, but think in it, and you have really sort of put your whole book when you do that, when the thinking process goes into slang, you've really dated your book.
Yes.
You've really
And again, that is true. Again, that is it's a balance because every book takes place in a particular time. So you want it to reflect the time in which it's taking place, but you also want it to be timeless enough that someone can read it 20 years from now and not be thrown by the slang. So again, it's a little goes a long way. It's the same thing. You sprinkle it throughout a little bit. Yeah. Did you have anything else, Sean? I think we interrupted you there.
No, that's my main.
Okay. Well, that was a really good point. Well, let me throw out a few questions for you all from our viewers here, and I don't want to keep you too long because I know it's late where you are, but anybody can grab this one, or you can all chime in. Christy asked, "What is a turnoff when you are reading a character? For example, what gives it away that the character feels inauthentic or not believable?" Now, you've touched on a few things like this, but is there anything else that you can think of that when you read it, you just go, "Oh, this is not a real character. This author doesn't know what they're doing." Jacqueline.
When a character when they're always sort of like the leader, or they're always carrying the conversation, or they're like always deciding what to do, like I think it's fine to have them be sort of, again, like a leader in the group, but I don't think it's really natural for one person or everyone to listen to one person at the same time, unless it's like, a king in like at like a, I don't know, a court or something like that. But
Right.
if it's just a group of friends, like one person isn't just gonna carry the conversation the entire time. And I've noticed that in a few books.
Okay, great. That's good. And what do you think of, again, it just sort of depends on the kind of book, but sometimes in sort of mass market fiction, we're seeing sort of stock characters, the cheerleader, the popular, the mean girl who's popular, and the jock and these sort of stock teenage characters that editors know writers aren't supposed to, rely on those. But do you see those still popping up in any contemporary books that you've read? Sophia.
Yeah, I feel like um in sometimes or before the pandemic I would go to my local library, and I never go to the teens section because in my library the teens section is filled with high school romance books. And I'm not saying that high school romance books are bad, all of them, but the ones that I particularly saw a lot in my library at least, were with these kind of characters. And it's fine to have them, and they can be fun in I don't know, a comedic book. I don't know, but the fact that they're all the same all the time is not interesting. You read it once and then you read it again, and it's the same book essentially,
Yeah.
even if it has a different story. Characters, I think I talk a lot about characters, but characters essentially are the main part of your story.
Yes.
You focus on your characters, and if your characters are all the same, your story kind of molds into the same thing.
Right, right.
Um,
No, that's a good point. Did anybody want to add to that before we move on from Josie?
Yeah, I feel like also kind of going off of what Sean said, I feel like a lot of times people forget what it's like for when they were high schoolers and they were middle schoolers, because you're not just like mini adults and you're also not kids. It's like kind of being an adult without knowing all the things in some way. So I think that, yeah, I think there's a kind of a disconnect between that part of life and like that's where kind of the tropes come in, where it's like basically an adult but you add in slang, and like adult relationships but you add in teen slang and teen emotions and stuff like that. But I think that it's a whole different part of your life, and everyone's had it before. Yeah.
Okay, good point. Are there any topics that you feel should not be written about in YA? Is there anything off limits, or does it all depend on how you address it? Sally, did you want to say something?
I have gotten books that should be off limits. One, because they're so badly written and the teens know it. And two, because some of the topics are so inappropriate, even for teenagers. And there was one book that I was handed by a rep that was the most vulgar book I have ever read. I had grown men who were embarrassed by it, and it should never have been published. And it was published for teenagers, and it floored me. So I think topic is important. I also think it depends on how it's approached.
Right.
But, bleak literature, somebody said there's a lot of sad literature. Bleak literature has been a big thing among, teen writing for a long time. And the question is how much, and especially right now with COVID around and all of the things that have happened, how much bleak literature do we really want to be pushing on our teens at this point? For me, that's a real question.
Right. Sean. Sorry.
One more thing. It takes a lot of imagination and creativity not to write about the topics that have been pushed for so long, I think. Really have to look for some new ideas and new approaches to things, new structures.
Right. No, I agree with that. Sean, what did you want to add to that?
I personally don't think there's any topics that are specifically off limits. I agree that it's all in how you write about it. But like some books, like the book Speak, it's a really powerful book that deals with a really adult topic, but it's still, it's still important I still think that high schoolers should read it, because even though it's a mature theme, I think the problem is when we try to say that certain topics are too adult, we don't realize that a lot of those topics teens are also involved with, like drugs. There's going to be drug use in high schools. There's going to be sex in high schools. There's going to be alcohol abuse in high schools. And if we say we can't write about these, you're putting real life things off limits, and I don't think that's helpful to any teenagers.
That is a good point. And there are going to be readers who might be struggling with some of these issues and need to see books that reflect what they're going through. So it is, yeah, I agree. Sophia, you had something to add?
I was just had a thought about bleak literature, which I'm not sure exactly is about topics and specifically, but bleak literature is, if it's all sad, I think Jacqueline talked about this too. If it's all sad, then it's hard to, I don't know how to phrase this, but if there's not only sadness, because if there's happy moments, then the sad moments are more sad, and then you won't be only sad about the book because there were happy things in there too, or other feelings, and you can relate to it more almost. And I feel like relating yourself or your feelings or your thoughts to books can be really important, especially for teenagers, I think, to kind of find or figure out what you're doing, or yourself almost. It sounds a little cheesy when you say it out loud, but I think that's I think books just play such a big role in our lives, even now that a lot of things are digital and on screens and everything. I still think that books affect how we develop and how our personalities are in the end.
I agree. And I think what I hear you're saying, maybe I'm wrong here, is that having that range of emotion in a book is is good. You know, you can have the sadness, but if it's offset with also joy, you get the range of emotion and you see the contrast. It's like real life. It reflects, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. And it kind of brings back to topics that, or yeah, in order to be able to relate to things, you don't know what a person's going through. I feel like it is really important how you write topics,
Mhm.
but I do not think that there are limits.
Okay, great.
Yeah, basically, I agree with Sean and Sally.
Okay. Okay, just a couple more questions and I'm going to let you go, but this is an interesting one. We're getting off the bleak here for a minute. Do any of you have favorite books that have animal characters in them? Middle grade or YA? Have you any come to mind? Oh, we've got Sean hold up your book again, Sean, so people can see it there.
The red pony.
Yes, the red pony. Mhm.
I really like Watership Down. My dad read it to me a couple times when I was a kid.
Mhm.
Also Redwall. That's a good one too.
Redwall's great. Yes, as is Watership Down. Anybody else have animal books they love? Jeremy,
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's a great
20,000
one.
Leagues.
Animal lovers.
Some
Mhm.
nonfiction, Jeremy, with animals in it. Come on. He has a whole menagerie of animals.
You want me to think of more of them? Is that what-
What is it about these particular books that you love with animal characters? We were just talking about characters. Is it as important if you have animal characters to develop them as fully as if they were human? Is that what makes these books good to you? I mean, are you able to care about them in the same way that you do with the human characters in books?
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe not exactly the same way. For a lot of animal books, animals are kind of depicted as just, humans, but with four legs. But I think that especially in Watership Down, a lot of that is devoted to how rabbit society is definitely not. I mean, it's more human than a real rabbit society in the book, but they don't understand art. It's a when they visit the more sheltered warren. I don't know. It's definitely neat to try and approach that as trying to depict an animal intelligence that is inhuman, but that humans can still care about.
Yeah, I agree. All right. What about graphic novels? Do any of you read those in our? Okay. No. What are there any particular authors you like or types of stories that you are drawn to in graphic novels?
Yeah, I've talked a little bit already, so I'm gonna
Mm.
keep this short. But one of the ones I really liked, especially a few years ago, is Bone by Jeff Smith.
Mm.
I like a lot of the similar things I like in regular in not regular in just straight prose stories that I like in graphic novels. Definitely like in inventive worlds and layers and good pacing. I like all of that stuff within graphic novels. I like in uh,
Mhm.
typical fiction.
Great. Anybody else read graphic novels? Jeremy, what do you like?
So I don't know. This isn't a typical sort of graphic novel, but Mouse, Maus,
Mm-hmm.
my favorites. And there's also The Arrival, which doesn't have any words in it, but pictures really tell a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, the great thing about the graphic novels now, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, they're just really comic books, but they're not. There are all kinds of stories. You could have science fiction, you can have contemporary, you can have fantasy, you can have, historical. and they're just told through this very visual medium. And I think, Noah, you mentioned pacing earlier. I think that is very important when you're writing a graphic novel, because your eye has to move across the page a certain way to make it work. So that's definitely something to look at. But Mouse, that's Jeremy. That's a great one. That's like one of the original graphic novels.
Let's start it.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to throw out one more here, and then we're going to let you guys go. Thank you for staying a little over. And we have so many questions that didn't get answered. I'm sorry to the people listening, but I didn't want to.
If you send them to us, maybe we can answer some of them. That's a
All
possibility.
right, well, we'll see. I don't want to, you guys are all so busy with school too. I appreciate your time here. What are some either genres or topics or types of stories, anything that you would love to see that's not getting written? Fiction, nonfiction? Do you want to see a mashup of fantasy and dystopian? Do you want to, throw in some horror? I don't know. What would you love to see? Sean, I'm going to start with you because you were always last.
All
Put
right.
you on the spot.
What would I love to see more of? I think anything outside of like the standard YA genre seems to be that kind of like realistic fiction, like often set in a middle school or high school. You've got the coming of age and the sports teams or whatever it is. Any kind of anything outside of that would be nice, like more science fiction. I've read a few good fantasy books that are YA. I'm blanking on the names right now. I think I agree with Noah and Jeremy that I'd like to see more nonfiction YA. You get like the picture books about that are nonfiction for little kids, and you have the adult nonfiction, but there's not much in between.
As far as the kind of YA nonfiction that you'd like to see, and any of you can chime in on this, are there particular topics? Do you want more biographies, more history, more great inventions, or just all of the above? Is there any particular topics you would like to see? Josie.
I feel like my favorite nonfiction books are always the ones of that either they take a different look at something that we've all heard about, or they investigate something completely different, and like talk about like shed a light on something in history that isn't usually talked about. Those are like always my favorite nonfiction books.
And do you like the narrative format where it's told like a story, like you're following one person through the events? Or do you prefer sort of what's called expository, where it's more just facts about the topic?
I think usually, I feel like depending on the topic, I think the one that fits it. I think when you're talking about like a bigger topic or more broader, maybe facts are better versus like if you're taking like an inside lens into a, more detailed event, then like that narrative is probably the way to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else on nonfiction before we move on from that? Jeremy.
So going back to what you were just saying about narratives, I think those are particularly useful for examining historical events in detail. Those can be very useful. I've read a lot of historical narratives of the Civil War period, and those have really helped me get a grasp of what people were thinking about during that time, and that's me sort of understand the time period better than just an expository textbook. So
Right.
I think that those are books that I would love to see more produced and are so few and far between these days.
Great. Well, and it goes back to the characters that we were talking about earlier, how important character is. So if you have that narrative structure, you can focus on the people in the events and get into sort of what they were experiencing on a more personal level, which I think helps you identify with them and really get to know them. Noah, your hand is raised.
Oh, I wanted to agree with the point Josie made about nonfiction, about like smaller events in history that usually don't get talked about. Like, there's so much like wild, crazy stuff has happened in history. That's kind of relatively unimportant. It does not affect the grander scope of things, but it's just wildly interesting to learn about. And that's my jam. I love that stuff. Even if it's really just very unimportant to the larger scope of things. I think that often like really humanizes history for me to hear about just the absolutely crazy stuff.
I agree. All right. Any fiction that you want to see that's not being done? Any genres, types of stories, formats, anything that Sophia?
I feel like science fiction recently, at least I haven't heard of any recent science fiction that people would recommend to me. I don't know, I just science fiction, whenever someone says it, I think like older books, Nightfall, just Isaac Asimov in general. Bradbury. I don't know. I think older books, and I can't even think of any recent science fiction books. And I feel like science fiction, I'm sure there are. I just can't come up with any. I feel like they're right now, especially for YA, as Sean said, it's realistic fiction in school. And fantasy. I feel like fantasy is a really, really big genre, which there are wonderful YA fantasy books that I've read that are more recent, and I love them. But I feel like I don't really see science fiction, and I think it would be interesting.
Okay.
Just to chime in here, since I have written science fiction for a long time, part of the problem with science fiction right now is that a lot of it is examining how technology will save us. And older science fiction looked at where we were with technology and how it was, said the great what if, what will happen if this is where we are now, what is coming, what will happen, how do we resolve some of the issues we have, knowing what we know now versus where is that going to take us. And that's why so many times in the past, they've considered science fiction to be predictive. Right now, I don't think that's happening. I mean, when primarily it seems to be examining technology because we're living it right now that already exists as a resolution. Whereas before it was really about how people and society use that technology. There's a big difference.
Yeah. That's interesting. All right. Jacqueline, do you have anything to add before we sign off here to this conversation about what you'd like to see?
Not really. I really love fantasy personally. I think it's so fun, but I would love to see more fantasy books that aren't like, I don't know, like vampires and werewolves or like just, yeah, that's sort of like really common. I'm sorry, I cannot like think of anything else right now, but
That's okay.
just
So
more
something
like
a little different,
just
fresher.
varied, yeah, more varied. Yeah.
Okay. But in the fantasy realm. And the great thing about fantasy is it's fantasy. So writers out there, you can make up whatever you want. So you can come up with something a little different, but the difference between fantasy and sci-fi is fantasy uses magic and that sort of those elements, whereas science fiction tends to have more the technology aspect of it, though we're starting to see combinations going on. Okay, well,
Realism too.
and magical realism, yes, that's you have that magical element, but in the real world as opposed to in a fantasy world. So that's the exciting thing about the possibilities that writers have right now. The genres are open. You can combine them however you want. And I think what I'm hearing from you all is we'd like to see some new stuff coming, some interesting, more out of the box ideas, which would be great. All right. Well, I'm going to let you all go. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This was really great. Thank you for all your information and your sharing. I'm just going to turn on the chat box real quick. So if people want to say how awesome you are, they can. But I'm having trouble turning this on. Oh, I can't. Sorry. It's not letting me. Anyway, I'm sure they're all thinking that you were great. But thanks so much, and good luck to all of you on your college applications and end of the school year and all of that. And keep writing. You all are awesome. So thank you so much, and thank you, Sally, for organizing this for us and getting them all here.
They're great kids, and they're really fabulous writers. Watch for their names.
Good. Yes, we will keep in touch. And if any of you get published, you have to send me the info and we will put it on our Celebrate and we will announce it because I want to know about it. Okay. All right. Thank you all. And thank you everyone for being with us tonight. And we will see you next week. All right.
All right. Thank you for having me and us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Fun. Thank you.
Bye.
Sure. Bye.